Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. So, the past week or so has been a really interesting time for DC, HBO, and Warner Media at large. As you probably already know, the $70 to $90 million Batgirl movie, which was almost entirely finished, has been completely scrapped, alongside the sequel to Scoob, which I feel like not nearly as many people are talking about. They're not coming to theaters, they're not being put on HBO Max, they're basically just being locked away so Warner Brothers can use them as a tax write-off. Reactions to this were all over the map, but one thing is certain. This is a really weird situation with almost no precedent in blockbuster movies, especially when the film is basically done. But what makes it even more noteworthy beyond those two films is the amount of change that WB, DC, and HBO Max are about to go through now that they're being spearheaded by Discovery, in a merger that has led to the cable channel behind Alaskan Bush People and American Chopper now being in charge of everything from Warner Brothers' century-long film library to DC Comics and Adult Swim. And I'm gonna be honest, while I do think there is some good news to be found in all this, I'm definitely a little worried about what the future holds for a lot of these brands. So that's what I'm gonna get into today. Not just Batgirl, but the entire new strategy that led to it getting dumped, among so many other things.
Give it up.
Actually, it would be more fun if he makes us take it from him.
But before I get into the rest of it, I should probably just address Batgirl first. There's been a lot of debate over whether the movie was just so horrible that WB couldn't bring themselves to release it, which I seriously doubt is true, considering that according to The Hollywood Reporter, the film tested around the same range as the first It movie. Now, does this mean that Batgirl is actually great? I mean, no. But I do think it's safe to say that the movie wasn't some kind of unprecedented disaster. The choice seems to have far less to do with the quality of the movie itself, and more to do with Warner Brothers wanting to revamp their entire film strategy. The former CEO, Jason Kilar, made the choice during the pandemic to release their films on HBO Max at the same time as they put them in movie theaters, which led to a lot of angry actors and filmmakers, and was a major factor in Christopher Nolan ditching the studio for Paramount. It was a really risky experiment, and one that now seems to be viewed as a failure, as going day and date on HBO Max seemed to really undercut these movies at the box office, which caused the studio to shift to a theatrical window of 45 days, which is still a pretty short time span. The new CEO, David Zaslav, is stepping back from all of that entirely and embracing theatrical outright. He was quoted as saying, "When you're in theaters, the value of the content and the overall viewing experience is elevated. As films moved from one window to the next, their overall value is elevated. We saw this clearly demonstrated with The Batman and Elvis. As someone who really loves seeing movies in the theaters and doesn't want that to go away, I'm at least glad that the theatrical experience probably isn't going to die anytime soon. Films going straight to streaming often makes them feel like far less of an event. I mean, Paramount's Top Gun: Maverick is currently the biggest movie of the year, and not all that long ago there were serious discussions being had about stranding it on Paramount Plus, which, in retrospect, would have made Paramount far less money and probably would have led to the film barely being discussed like a few weeks after its release. There's just no chance that it would have been a film event on Paramount Plus in nearly the same way. Warner Media seems to have realized this, which I think is great, especially during the week that I have to settle for watching a new Predator movie on Hulu instead of in a theater. But it did put Batgirl and the Scoob sequel in a very awkward position, as both of those movies were always intended for an HBO Max release, not a theatrical one. Something the new regime at the company seems to have very little interest in, and which already caused the cancellation of the Wonder Twins movie. But I have to say, I like the character of Barbara Gordon a lot in Batman comics and cartoons, in her own comic series. This is a character I would welcome a movie about. And of course, it is sad to see something that people spent years of their life on not even get to see the light of day anywhere. But I also understand why Warner seems eager to ditch streaming movies, with some notable exceptions like Netflix's Bird Box a few years ago. It really seems like these things just get released into the void and are often never discussed again. For every Prey that manages to generate some interest, there's 5 Paranormal Activity Next of Kins or Spencer Confidentials, which seem to be dead on arrival. Warner is understandably looking to get away from that, but they seem to be taking it a step farther too, which I'm a little concerned about. So in addition to these cancellations, HBO Max has also just been pulling stuff off of their service. Things like the HBO Max movies An American Pickle and The Witches. Now that's already pretty strange because the service outright owns these titles, but I've seen a lot of people online just shrug it off as no big deal. It's not like these were great or super memorable movies anyway. Where I start to get a lot more worried is at the removal of actual HBO shows like Vinyl and Mrs. Fletcher. That sets a precedent that I really don't like. If entirely removing HBO shows is just on the table now, where does that leave HBO shows that I love but weren't hugely popular? Stuff like Show Me a Hero, Treme, or The Leftovers. Will those just be yanked off the platform one day with zero warning or acknowledgement? HBO has one of the best libraries in TV history, so having it now led by a CEO who has dismissed scripted dramas in the past and built Discovery's brand on the back of cheap reality TV really worries me. For now, the core HBO team seems to be remaining in place, and I hope it stays that way. Because sure, I'll grant that HBO has never had a perfect record, but from Oz and The Sopranos to today with shows like The Rehearsal and Succession, they've always had one of the most consistently interesting and original schedules on television. Then there's the fact that Discovery Plus and HBO Max are going to be merging and will apparently be more expensive as a result. And I gotta say, as someone with almost no interest in Discovery Channel's programming outside of the occasional Shark Week documentary, that doesn't sound great to me. But TV aside, there's also one giant elephant in the room I have yet to bring up. The announcement that DC is going to be shifting towards more of an MCU-like model, with a 10-year plan to create a more coherent universe. I've seen this met with a lot of enthusiasm from fans, but I gotta say, I'm a little skeptical, for a few reasons. One is that I kind of enjoy how all over the map DC movies are allowed to be. The fact that Joker and Shazam could coexist and not be boxed in by each other, I think was actually becoming a strength for DC, offering audiences a far wider variety of tones than the MCU can usually manage. But on top of that, trying to copy the MCU has been attempted time and time again by different studios, and it rarely works out like they think it will. I'm really looking at you, Universal's Dark Universe. Now, obviously DC has a shared universe in the comics, but I'm just not sure it's the best way to go with the feature films, especially now that there's already so many DC franchises going. Is Robert Pattinson's Batman going to be forced into a Shazam movie? Will the Joker sequel have to do a post-credits scene that promises the next movie will be a crossover with Wonder Woman? I doubt it. My guess is they'll try to have everything very loosely related in the giant multiverse that's going to be set up in the Flash movie. But then you get into, does Warner really want to reshape its DC movies around what happens in an Ezra Miller star vehicle? Being different from the MCU had just started to really become DC's biggest strength, and I really hope this doesn't end up feeling like another decade of them trying to play catch-up. In YouTube videos like this, it's really easy to be completely negative or super positive, but I think the situation at Warner Brothers is just a lot more nuanced than that. It's smart that the company is rethinking how it handles its films, and I know there's a lot of fans excited about the possibility of a new shared DC universe. But I'm also pretty worried about how Discovery will treat HBO's scripted drama series, or that DC movies will start playing it extremely safe and stop taking risks. Not to mention all the actual work that was wasted on these unreleased movies. So I have a hard time saying this is all good news or this is all bad news here. At the end of the day, I really hope that Warner Brothers actually does start prioritizing quality above all in their theatrical releases. And I hope they don't water down HBO into just being a bunch of safe spin-offs and, God forbid, cheap reality TV. All of this is a pretty major shift in direction, and I'm very interested to see how it plays out in the long term. I guess we'll see where this is all heading, but in the meantime, I'd really like to thank today's sponsor, Brilliant. You know Brilliant. They help you tackle new math, science, and computer science concepts in a very enjoyable and hands-on way. It's really easy and actually fun to dive into Brilliant's everyday math. Instead of trapping you into one strict way of learning, everyday math helps give you the tools to confidently tackle an area of learning that you might have struggled with as a kid. Suddenly, the stuff that you might remember having a really hard time with in the past becomes so much more manageable and fun. Brilliant leans into the fact that there's a lot of ways to solve a problem, and it lets you experiment instead of trapping you into a very rigid way of learning, with an ever-expanding selection of topics. So go to brilliant.org/midnight and try it for free, and the first 200 people to go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. That's brilliant.org/midnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.